Hi, I'm Trudy Moore, your designated broker here at HomeSmart. Today I will walk you through the steps to take to fill out and understand the AAR Real Estate Agency Disclosure and Election Form, often referred to as the READE form. Although not state required, the READE form is used in every transaction here at HomeSmart. Having your clients sign this form has become the standard of care in the real estate industry. Best practice indicates that it's ideal to have the form signed at the first appointment with your client. This would also be an appropriate time to discuss any and all agency relationships that may occur. Before we get started with how to fill out the READE form, it's important to mention two things. Number one, the READE form is not the exclusive buyer-broker agreement form, and number two, no compensation is given when your client signs the READE form. Here's how to go about filling out the form. On line 1, simply enter HomeSmart. For example, do not write HomeSmart International, HomeSmart Arrowhead, or any team name or variation. On line 2, write in your name as it is found on the Arizona Department of Real Estate website. Again, no variations or team or group names here. Lines 3 to 5 are intended to advise your clients on the importance of understanding agency relationships or representation before they enter into any agreement with you. Lines 6 to 11 discuss that an agent, other than the listing broker, can represent a buyer. This information goes on to state that the buyer broker may be receiving compensation or commission, as we know it, from the seller or the seller's broker. It's also noted here that the buyer broker has fiduciary duties of loyalty, obedience, etc. with the buyer. Lastly, in this section, it states that other potential buyers, represented by the buyer's brokerage, may also make offers or acquire an interest in the same or similar properties. On to lines 12 through 14. This is where you inform your client that the seller's brokers have the same fiduciary duties of loyalty, obedience with their clients. The seller's broker may also list similar properties to the one being listed. Lines 15 through 22 explain limited representation. This term refers to the instance when one broker represents both the buyer and the seller. It states here that a broker, either acting directly or through one or more licensees with the same brokerage, can legally represent both the buyer and the seller in a transaction. However, it does also state that this can be done only with the informed consent of both the buyer and seller. This informed consent will be granted with the AAR form that's titled Consent to Limited Dual Representation. Without written authorization, the broker will not be allowed to disclose to the other party that the seller will accept a price or terms other than stated in the listing, or that the buyer will accept a price or terms other than stated in the offer. It also states that there will be conflicts in the duties and that the disclosure of confidential information may only be made with written permission. Lines 23 through 29 state that regardless of who the broker represents, the broker must exercise reasonable skill and care in the performance of his or her duties. It goes on to say that brokers must disclose all known facts which materially and adversely affect the consideration or price paid by either party. It also declares that the broker must be truthful and honest to both the buyer and the seller. It's important to note that this section addresses the fact that the sellers, landlords, and brokers are not obligated to disclose that the property has been, number 1, the site of a natural death, suicide, homicide, or any crime classified as a felony. Number 2, that the property has been owned or occupied by a person exposed to HIV or diagnosed as having AIDS or any other disease not known to be transmitted through common occupancy of real estate. Or, number 3, that the property is located in the vicinity of a sex offender. Sellers or their representatives may not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of offers as confidential unless there is a confidentiality agreement between the parties. Lines 30 to 32 will advise the buyers and sellers that the duties of the broker in a real estate transaction does not relieve them from the responsibility to protect their own interests. The buyer and the seller are responsible for carefully reading all agreements to ensure that the documents adequately express their understanding of the transaction. Lines 33 through 38 require your selection. You will check a box that declares that the buyer either elects to have you represent the buyer as the buyer broker, or represents the seller as the seller's broker, or to show properties listed with the broker's firm where the buyer agrees that the broker shall act as an agent for both the buyer and the seller, provided that the seller consents to that limited representation. Lines 39 through 44 also require your selection. Here is where you will check a box to declare that you will represent the buyer as the buyer's broker, represent the seller as the seller's broker, or to show the seller's property to buyers represented by the broker's firm, where the seller will agree that the broker shall act as agent for both the buyer and the seller, provided that the buyer consents to the limited dual representation. Line 45 also requires a selection. Here you will check a box noting whether it is the buyer or the seller that is signing the READE form. When the buyer or seller signs below, it will acknowledge that the READE form is a disclosure of duties and that it is not an employment agreement. Line 47 is where you're going to print the name or names of your buyer, seller, or landlord or tenant. Line 48 is where the buyer, seller, landlord, or tenant will sign and date the form. Remember, you should always give your client a copy of any document that they sign. I hope that this summary of the real estate agency disclosure and election form, or the READE form, was helpful and gave you the knowledge you need to confidently discuss this form with your clients. As always, if you have any questions or concerns about the READE form or any other form, please contact the broker support for assistance.